Also the vice president of our program committee, and we are very, very happy to have our distinguished guests and speakers with us tonight. So I'm sure you know, because you signed up to come, that tonight's program is all about the Affordable Housing Amendment, that if you're in the city of Cincinnati, this will appear on your ballot for the November election. And it is a very important issue that we are happy to be exploring with you. We hope that tonight's program will give you everything you need to know about this amendment so you can make an informed decision as a voter. It is a citizen-initiated charter amendment for the city charter that increases the earnings tax by 0.3%. And tonight's program, like all of our programs, is nonpartisan and non-political, meant to be informational and educational, but we want you to know that Women's City Club has indeed endorsed this amendment, and we are very, very happy to be presenting this program about it. So without any more ado, I would like to introduce Jeff Dye, who is our current president of Women's City Club and also the tech genius and guru who is taking care of everything tonight. So Jeff, do you want to say a few words?
I want to welcome everybody on behalf of Women's City Club to this forum. It's the first one that we've done this fall. It's been a strange year with all the different activities going on. It was a very busy summer with the ballot measure and all that. So it's been an interesting time. We have several programs coming up that I'd like to tell you about briefly. And there's a lot more information in our update that you can find if you need to know more information about them. After tonight, tomorrow night, there's a Cincinnati school board forum that will be the school board candidates as a Zoom meeting. And then there's another school board candidates forum, which is an in-person, which is on Monday at Corinthian Baptist Church. It's the only in-person candidate forum, including all 5 candidates of the CPS school board. City council candidates will be in a, well, I almost want to call it a walkabout, but it's a meet and greet, and that is on Tuesday, October 3rd. There's a judicial forum next week on October 5th by the Cincinnati Bar Association, and we're co-sponsoring that as well. There's a candidates and issues forum that all in Cincinnati is involved with, and that is on October 26th. So there's a lot going on as far as additional forums about issues and candidates. In addition, we have our Women's City Club book club, which has been excellent lately. And the book we're reading is a book called All That She Carried by Taya Miles. And then looking even further into the future, our annual Feist Tea is coming up on December 3rd. So follow our website, get on our mailing list, see what's going on. We've got a lot going on all the time. So, and also please consider joining the club if you're not already a member. So that's it for me, and I'll send it back to Janet to continue.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for all that. Jeff is a very hardworking, in our organization, the role of president is not honorary. You do as much work, probably more so than anybody else, and we salute Jeff for taking all this on, plus, again, remaining as our resident tech genius and guru who makes these kinds of programs possible for all of you. So, as I said, I'm Janet Buning. I am the vice president in charge of programs, but I do want to recognize the other members of the program committee who were active in planning this particular event tonight. Many of them I see on screen. I see Jan Seymour, who proposed the idea that we would have this program on this topic. Susan Noonan, who has been a rock star for all of our programs forever and ever. Laurie Frank, who's not visible at the moment, but she has also been a stalwart supporter and a hard worker. Sarah Gideons, who, in addition to being on the program committee, does a terrific job of getting the word out on every platform, every format, every media as our communications person. And let's see, did I leave anybody out? I said Laurie, Jeff, Susan Noonan, I've mentioned you. So those are the people who bring this program with you tonight. Just a few quick words about the housekeeping thing. I see that all of you are muted. Hooray, thank you for that. We don't like to have, dogs barking, background noise, and things like that. Later on the program, if we're in more of a discussion mode, please feel free to unmute and join in. Our format, as is typical for us, we have our two speakers who will do a presentation, about 15-20 minutes each. Then we will go into a Q&A session. But at any time during tonight's program, please use the chat format to post any questions or any comments that you have. We will be monitoring the chat, and we will answer those questions when we get to the Q&A section of the program. But we also welcome any comments you might like to add into that. So that's enough for housekeeping. So let's get the program underway. I have a sad announcement to make to begin with, which is that one of our speakers, our vice mayor, I should say, and a member of Women's City Club, Jan-Michelle Levin-Kearney, was scheduled to be part of tonight's program. But if you know anything about her schedule, you know that it is impossible sometimes. She was called away for another obligation, and therefore she is not able to attend the program tonight. She does send her regrets and wishes us all well. So we're sorry to not have Jan-Michelle, but we still have two phenomenal presenters tonight. We are so happy to welcome Robin, my mouth is not working, sorry. Robin Wright Pierce, who is the founder and CEO of the Wright Institute for Transformative Change. She is also the campaign leader for the Affordable Housing Amendment, which the group used to be called Cincinnati Action for Housing Now. So she will be one of our speakers tonight. Our other speaker, many of you already know, is Peg Fox, who is the executive director of the Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition of Cincinnati, usually referred to as MARC. And we are delighted to have both of these people with us. They know so much about this amendment. They have worked very hard to get it on the ballot. They're going to explain to you in detail what the purpose is, how it will work, why it's important to have a renewable fund for providing this housing for the lowest income individuals. And after their presentations, again, you will have lots and lots of time to ask your questions and to possibly dialogue about some of this. So if we are ready to begin, I would like to start by asking Robin, who's going to be our leadoff speaker. Robin's going to, well, I'll let her tell you what she's going to talk about. So Robin, I saw you a minute ago on screen. I keep losing you. There you are. Okay, welcome. We've never met before. We've had lots of emails, and thank you for taking part in this program, and thank you for all the hard work you have done.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, for this opportunity to be here, and for the support of Women's City Club and our initiative so far. Jenna introduced some of my formal titles. In addition to those, I'm also the First Lady at Beloved Community Church, pastored by my husband, Pastor Nelson Pierce Jr. But more informally, before I jump into the amendment, just want to share a little bit about myself as it relates to the conversation about affordable housing. Because I come to you with those various hats on, but I also come to you as someone who has been personally impacted by the issue of housing insecurity that is growing rapidly in our community. I share this story from time to time, and it's important to share this story, I think, because my story is similar to so many people in our communities. But as someone who grew up in Cincinnati, growing up, I moved 17 times by the time I turned the age 17 and went to college. And so I know the experience, right? I am a product of now an adult version of the 3,500 CPS students that are estimated to experience homelessness this school year, right? I know the experience of those children. And even after college, when I first had my son, I moved back to Cincinnati after college, and I could not afford to find a place to stay because I was one of those lucky millennials who graduated into a recession where jobs were hard to come by. And so having the degree or not, it was a struggle for me to find a living wage. And so I remember bringing my newborn baby home and living in an apartment, a makeshift two-family, living on the top level of a makeshift two-family where I did not even have a bathtub to bathe my boy in. And so this is very near and dear to my heart. I know the experience of the struggles of housing insecurity very personally. And so I just wanted to share that so that you all know that, yeah, I'm speaking to you as a representative of the campaign, but I'm also speaking to you as someone who has experienced the hardships, all the multitude of ways that not knowing where you're going to sleep at night impacts your psychological well-being, impacts your educational experience, impacts your sense of safety and a sense of home and place. And so while I am blessed now to have gotten past that phase and one of the lucky ones to have made it to more stability, I am very much aware of the impact. And so I just wanted to share that as we get started. If it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and share with you all using some slides, some general information about issue 24 and why we have launched this campaign and why we believe that you all should join us in voting yes on issue 24. Issue 24 is our opportunity to say that we're going to come together as a community and create a Cincinnati that works for all of us, create a community where all individuals, regardless of our income, can have access to safe and stable housing, right? To be able to dream about and create the life that we want for ourselves and our children and our communities, and to live in vibrant communities and neighborhoods. That's what issue 24 is all about. It was launched by Cincinnati Action for Housing Now, which is a growing coalition now of more than 24 organizations who are committed to that exact goal. As you see here, there's a multitude of organizations represented, from housing experts to advocacy organizations, just so many faith communities, so many organizations, including the Women's City Club of Greater Cincinnati, who has come together to do something about our affordable housing crisis that we are facing and have faced, quite frankly, for a very long time. And let me know if you all can't see the slides, by the way. You can see them?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So at the core of our initiative, at the core of issue 24 is funding the creation and preservation of truly affordable housing, pathways to home ownership, and safe and vibrant communities. And we're doing that because we believe that issue 24 will bring us one step closer to funding truly affordable housing. This ballot measure at its core will give us voters a chance to say yes to restoring our earned income tax to its 2020 levels and using that revenue that's created to fund truly affordable housing. Our research shows that for most Cincinnati households, that's going to amount to less than no more than $11 a month. For many, much less than that. But together it can generate $40 to $50 million each year to ensure that we have safe and stable places to call home. We launched issue 24 because we know that housing is a basic need and the foundation of all aspects of our lives, as I was sharing earlier. We launched it in part because rents have risen more in the city of Cincinnati in the last year than in any city in the entire country. This is a crisis that has been ongoing for a long time, but in the last 3 to 4 years since 2020, since the pandemic, rents has increased. We have been in the top 3 to 5 of cities throughout the country that have had huge jumps and increases. And so our once really affordable city, generally speaking, is quickly becoming unaffordable. And then quite frankly, for people with low incomes, as was the case with my family, even though my mom worked full-time, actually for Access at the time, one of Metro subsidiary companies, we didn't have enough income, right, for her to keep stable housing. And so for poor folks, it's been a long-term issue. But as you know, this issue is really growing. As you see here on the slide, a news report just recently shared data that said that in this right now, the current median asking rental rate in Cincinnati is over $1,800 per month, which is far more than what most of us can afford. As a comparison, in 2020, according to the 2020 census, the median rent was $760 in Cincinnati, right? And so while the median rent isn't $1,815, the median asking price of available units right now is over $1,800, right? And so that's not affordable for our communities. We launched issue 24 because we know that 1 in 3 of us cannot afford our current housing costs. We know that we are short tens of thousands of units of housing affordable to those of us with the lowest incomes, particularly those of us who are at or below 30% AMI, so around $30,000 a year of household income. There are the vast majority of people, more than 50% of folks at that income level, are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. And so we know that this is a big crisis. 1 in 3 of us are struggling to pay our bills. We launched issue 24 because we know that Black families are hit the hardest in a city that has such a large Black community. In terms of numerical representation of the city, this is a striking reality because 57% of Black households are making at or below $30,000 per year. A significant portion of Black folks in our communities are paying more than 50% of their housing income on housing. And the reality is our incomes aren't keeping up, right? We know that it would be great if everyone just made more money. That would be helpful if everyone made more money. But I don't know about you, but my income has not doubled since 2020 as the median asking rate has. And so it's important that we acknowledge this reality that the top 4 of the top 5 most populated jobs in the city of Cincinnati actually pays below $30,000 a year. And this is really important because if folks can't make more money, they have to have affordable housing, right? And so outside of nurses, a significant portion of our community is suffering. And then the reality is federal money is harder and harder to get, and it's a lot of work to get what is available. Federal funds are really starting to dry up over the decades. The federal government has invested less and less into affordable housing, leaving cities all across the country like our own to have to fill those gaps. And so this has left those of us with the lowest income the most susceptible and vulnerable to the challenges of our moment. And so issue 24 really is our solution to these challenges, right? And I didn't even share all of the data. I didn't share the fact that 3,500 CPS students are projected to experience homelessness at some point in this school year. That's about 10% of Cincinnati public school students are going to have an experience related to homelessness. And their experience may be similar to mine in that maybe they weren't always living on the streets. Maybe they are living doubled or tripled up in apartments with relatives, right? Are living in shelters, right? But we know that this is a crisis. And so we're advocating to restore our city's earned income tax to its 2020 level from 1.8% to 2.1% to create an ongoing and targeted revenue source to fund the creation and preservation of truly affordable housing. As I said earlier, this tax restoration will cost most households less than $11 a month, but will generate up to potentially $50 million a year toward affordable housing. And so what our amendment will do is 5 things generally. The first thing it does is it allows the people to invest in housing for all. So our amendment will actually amend the charter requiring the city to levy that 0.3% tax restoration to be used for truly affordable housing. And so we have to first say, hey, we want the opportunity to restore our earned income tax to its 2020 levels. And then in 2024, we'll vote again to say, let's implement this tax. And so first, it will allow us to say, we want a chance to invest in housing for all. Importantly about that tax restoration, that 0.3% is a restoration, as I keep saying, because in 2020, our earned income tax with the bus levy that passed dropped from 2.1% to 1.8%. It was at that 0.3% has been there since the 1970s. And so we're going back to a very familiar tax rate. And even in doing so, as you see at the bottom of the screen, Cincinnati will continue to have the lowest earned income tax rate of any city in the state of Ohio and many of our neighboring cities in the neighboring states. In other words, we will still be at a competitive edge in terms of recruiting and attracting businesses and things like that. The second thing our amendment does is it allocates most of the funds generated to housing those most in need. So at least 65% will have to go to develop and maintain housing for those at that lower income level. That 30% AMI, $30,000 a year is just an estimated example of about roundabout of that with like a household of 3, for instance. Additional money is also available beyond that 65%, up to 30% can go to several other sources, including rental housing for those making up to 50% AMI, so $48,000 a year. In doing so, it prioritizes equity and justice. It says that developers who receive this money have to use it to prioritize housing for those protected classes and folks who have been historically marginalized, discriminated against with redlining and such, but also that the committee will work with the city to ensure that a number of units are actually accessible to folks with disabilities as well. And so equity and justice is at the center of this amendment. The third thing it does is it supports current and future home ownership. We believe in the power and importance of home ownership. And so part of that 30% of the funds generated can also go for down payment assistance, but also critical repairs for current homeowners up to 80% AMI, so about $68,000 a year of income as a rough around estimate. The fourth thing it'll do is provide emergency support services for folks. And so allocating money for things like legal support for folks facing evictions, emergency rental assistance, shelter services, foreclosure avoidance support, and so many other emergency support needs. The fifth thing it does, and this is really important, is it gives power to the people. Our amendment will create a community advisory board that will partner with the city to ensure equitable distribution of the resources. The amendment actually states that the city has to meet with this board at least 6 times a year to help have input and guidance around the decisions that are made, and also that there has to be at least 2 annual public meetings open to the general public so that there's accountability, so that there's input from the everyday folks in the process. Importantly, this community advisory board is an 11-member board, and on that board has to have representation from folks who have experienced homelessness, folks who currently live in subsidized housing or housing that's funded by the trust fund and the units created with this money, nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, right? So like a hodgepodge of people, but it has to include people who are most impacted by the crisis of this moment to ensure that the direction and the distribution of the funds is actually centering those in need as well, and giving power to folks to have a say over the creation of their city. And so importantly, as I close up here, just want to, again, just stating the magnitude of the reach of this amendment. This isn't something that's only going to impact a small portion of our community. This is actually a significant share of the Cincinnati community. In fact, for Black households in particular, we're talking 80% of Black households who will qualify for one of the various services that's created from these funds, between the rental housing, the down payment, and home ownership support, et cetera. And so this is a huge portion. Even if you take race out of it and look at the city overall, we're looking at well beyond 65 to 70% of Cincinnati that will qualify, really because incomes for most of us are just so low that this really has the opportunity to impact a vast share of the city in terms of who qualifies for the services. And also, we get a question often like, how many units are you talking about creating with this? You know, when you talk about the rental units in particular, our estimates show that between 400 and 700 units annually can be either maintained and preserved or created with this, which is critical because we have had years and years in recent time. There have been several years in which we've actually lost affordable units. And so this actually will ensure that we're not losing affordable units, but we're also actually creating more units. And so that's that's my portion, at least, of the invitation of this and why issue 24 is so important. Issue 24 gives us an opportunity to create a future where all of us can live in vibrant communities, where Cincinnati can work for all of us, where folks aren't spending 50% or more of their income on their housing, right? Where folks have the resources to create a better community for themselves, their families, and our society. And so with that, I will close out and turn it back over, I guess.
Janet, you're muted.
No, I'm not.
Thank you. I was muted. Yeah, thank you for that reminder. Thank you. I've muted myself so I wouldn't make noise. Yes. Robin, thank you for those amazing statistics that you shared, some very sobering thoughts there. I was astounded to hear the statistics that 65 to 70% of our community and 80% of our Black community will benefit from this amendment. That's quite a lot of folks in our city. And for all the good information you shared. And I saw a couple of questions going up in chat as you spoke, but we will get to those after our next speaker. So you've heard a lot now about what the amendment says and why it's needed and who it will benefit. Peg Fox is going to talk a little more about some of the details of it. I believe you were helpful in writing the amendment. Is that true, Peg, that you were?
The first try in 2021. And
Yes.
To the campaign's credit, Mark is on the campaign committee. Josh Spring contacted over 50 nonprofits and asked for input. So the document went from 5 pages to a little over 2 pages. So it is very focused and more streamlined. This time around, it also has a dedicated funding source of the earnings tax, whereas the last time it did not have that. Mm-hmm. And I also want to draw the attention to the fact that these are public dollars, and this is public approval. And the public elects officials and the public votes on issues. And it's important not to privatize housing for folks totally, especially in need. So by that, I mean moderate and low-income housing. There's something about public scrutiny that tends to help rather than privatizing the market. So I really want to underscore that. I'm thrilled that it's the earnings tax. And I hope voters in Cincinnati take a look at Cincinnati's the lowest earnings tax city in the state of Ohio. And I think that's another reason to support this. The fund matches the need. And if we build, 400 to 700 units per year, it will take us probably 20 years to really make a dent into the need, which is 28,000. And the report that generated that need, the Xavier's Building Institute, or I can't think of the title yet, that LISC asked for, that is being updated. But I'd like to give you another update. There are immigrants, new arrivals that are in housing situations out of the goodness of their relatives or friends, and some are, 7 in 1 unit. So if you add the current kind of educated guess, there are between 3,000 and 5,000 new arrivals that do not have housing. Add that to the 28,000, which is a figure that was generated back in 2018, 2017. And we're up to at least 31,000 units that are needed in the city. That doesn't count the 16,000 plus that are needed in the county. So the timing is right. the type of funding of this initiative is right. And I'm biased, of course, but it's time for us to get started. So I also, Mark believes that having public input is so important. And the stronger the public is, I think the more courageous our elected officials will be able to act more swiftly. If they have the dollars, if the public approves those dollars, then I think it will make it, as odd as it sounds, it will make it easier for elected officials to act. So if the private community, i.e. the business community, sees that public dollars are being used for the public good and has been approved by the voters, I think all of that can only benefit housing and benefit the city of Cincinnati, which needs those resources. Then other resources that have already been pledged or hopefully approved, particularly in this November election, can be utilized for other things. So that's, and Robin pretty much covered the important points of the amendment. So as I said, I have no objectivity when it comes to the importance of passing this amendment. It's important to note that the Community Housing Advisory Board would be appointed by Cincinnati City Council, so another public body, and that board would be up to 11 people, and it would be a mix of people of representative from the rental community, from the single-family homeowner community that are on affordable housing, need that. It would be a representative from real estate community, a representative both for-profit and nonprofit from the development community. It also allows for a 5% of the entire collected money to go towards being some type of staff position or administrative position. I think some of the questions we may receive tonight is, who's the point person? How is this going to work? So we've allowed for that kind of funding. And again, that means that you and myself and many other people in that $11 per month would be funding that individual. So I think that's important to note, even though it was said before. I really want to underscore that. So this gives us an opportunity to work together and to make a difference in people's everyday needs. So I'd like to spend the time, Janet and Robin, if you're okay with this, fielding questions, and that would generate probably some discussion.
That's great. I always appreciate a speaker who is succinct and gets her thoughts together and wants to hear what everybody else has to say. Thank you, Peg, for that. And thank you, too, for all the work you have done for, I can't remember how many decades now you've been leading MARC. How long have you been the executive director of MARC?
Not that many decades. I'm going into my 17th year. Yeah.
17 years, yeah.
Right.
Almost 2 full decades. That is an amazing record, and you have accomplished so much good during that time, and I want to salute you for that, as well as your succinct presentation. I also want to note, if you're not looking in the chat, Robin has been very helpfully posting links that you might want to save, and you can, if you don't know how to save chat, you can click on those 3 little buttons and you can save the chat and you can capture all this so you have this good information available. But she has been posting links to the study that Peg referenced that was done by the Community Building Institute that Liz Bloom runs at Xavier, and she also put the link to the website that you can go to read the amendment text, and it is very readable. It is very, I do salute them, having read a number of Cincinnati charter issues. it is very clear about what is going to happen. It refers to the city a lot without defining the city's role. And well, maybe some of the questions might center around that. We do have Victoria Parks, who's a member of our city council, in attendance tonight. And she has indicated to me by some prior email that if the question is something she can address, that she would be willing to speak to that issue. If there's a question relative to city council's role, that was the thing that Jan Michelle was going to be speaking about. So we don't want to put her on the spot too much. She wasn't, prepared in advance, but she did express a willingness to try to answer some questions if you have things in that regard. So I will be quiet now, and let's see, Jeff, have you been monitoring the chat? Are you ready to call on people, or do you want me to do that?
I'll let you do that.
Okay, let me do that. Okay. Well, the first question that I'm seeing is from Vanessa Sparks, who is asking, how does this amendment differ from the existing affordable housing charter? And then her question, how to get a copy of the slides. That part already has been answered by Robin, but either Robin or Peg, if you'd like to speak to how this amendment differs from the existing affordable housing charter. Who wants to do that?
Is there an existing affordable housing charter?
There are some existing programs. I don't know if I'd call it a charter. I'm just reading Vanessa's wording. And Vanessa, do you want to say something about your question?
Yeah.
You can unmute yourself, Vanessa, and clarify your question if you wish.
Sure. One of the things that has come up is the fact that the affordable housing charter, for lack of a better reference, is currently on the books. However, it has not been tapped into to really address the issue of affordable housing.
Okay, I understand your question now, Vanessa. Thank you for clarifying that. In 2018, Councilmember David Mann sponsored the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It passed City Council. It's an ordinance. Now, the challenge is it has, I think, maybe $2,500 in it.
1,300 actually.
Oh, 1,500. Okay, yeah, it's gone down. All right.
1,300 that was private donation, not public money. Yeah, I'll let you finish, Peg.
Thank you. David Mann, when he was on City Council, tried to do a variety of things to ensure that City Council would put money into that fund. But that never really was fully realized under the former administration. So when there's a body called the Cincinnati Development Fund, and that body is a private nonprofit body that does some affordable housing, but doesn't really focus on affordability below 80%. And so the greatest need is where Robin stated is 50% and below. And that's where most of the funding that would be generated by this earnings tax would be the focus. So that's the difference. So thank you for asking that question, Vanessa. Really
can I add to that too? Because there's a few nuances to add, and I see Councilwoman Victoria leaning in. If you want to add additional nuances, that's great as well. Because the city, since this current administration did create an affordable housing leverage fund, sort of a fund of funds that is currently primarily managed through the Cincinnati Development Fund. The fund that we are suggesting that 65% of the funds go into is Fund 439. That's that affordable housing trust fund that was created in 2018 that Peg was just referencing. So we are suggesting to actually allocate a significant portion of the money into that specific fund, because that is the only fund within that fund of funds that has this level of targeting. So while any of the funds could theoretically focus in these income areas, they don't have to, right? And what we are suggesting is that we ought to target the communities who are hardest hit. And so this particular fund focuses that resources on those communities that are hardest hit. And so not only are we allocating the money to that fund, but then as I shared, the charter amendment actually will specify within that where it goes. And so there has been resources, donations, one-time investments put into that Affordable Housing Fund of funds that's going to a number of initiatives across the city already. But as we know, there is a need at these particular income levels, which are harder to fund. If we're just quite frank about it, it's actually harder to fund housing at these lower incomes because people are able to contribute less toward the cost, right? And so there's more subsidy needed. And so often, as folks are deciding on where to invest the affordable housing dollars that are in that fund of funds, there's decisions that are made about, well, where do we prioritize? And what we are saying is that we, the people, believe we ought to prioritize those lowest levels. And so we're going to allocate funding specifically there, a recurring fund that focuses on where the need is greatest, because we know that those are the folks who need it the most. There's probably even more nuance than that, but I'll stop there for the sake of time.
And I'd like to add something.
Okay, please do, Victoria. Thank you.
So when we voted on this, I will say that Jan, Michelle, I, and Scotty Johnson, I fought with everything that I had. I wanted the funds to be restricted to go to fund 439, where the money would be targeted to those who need it the most. And I would still support restricting those funds. And we lost. We lost the vote. But I just want you to know that I fought with everything I had. And I truly believe that these dollars should be targeted to those who need it the most. Right now, I think they're starting at, it goes up to 100%. Starts at 60.
80% and above.
Yeah, instead of starting at 30 or even starting at 60, it starts at 80, which I'll never agree with that. So, that's where we are.
Oh, that's very helpful. Is there anything else you want to add about City Council's thoughts about the amendment, or is it premature to ask that question?
It might be premature.
Okay, wait and see what the voters say, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. I can only speak for myself.
And I appreciate that. And we hope you please continue to speak anytime you have something you want to add. I really appreciate that you're present and can fill that space for us. Thank you so much. Vanessa, Vanessa has another question she's posted in chat. How will this group deal with the imbalance in the tax abatement allocations that are still being passed despite the federal lawsuit that is in appeal? And then her second question, and we might repeat this again to get the two pieces in. Who decided to change the city AMI to the county AMI level? What happened post-pandemic? So who wants to deal with the first one about the imbalance in the tax abatement allocations that are still being passed despite the federal lawsuit?
So I'll take the first, you take the second, Peg?
Sure.
Awesome, because you were more connected to the second part. So the short answer is this amendment doesn't address that. To be clear, which doesn't mean that it's not on the radar, the hearts and minds, or even that it's not being worked on, that challenges around tax abatement. Those things are a priority, but this particular amendment doesn't directly or address that. And so that is an additional housing need that is being fought on a lot of fronts already and will continue to be fought.
And for those of us, and I'm speaking for myself here, who are woefully informed about a lot of this, I don't know what the tax abatement allocations, what the imbalance even means. Can you explain that for me and others who may be equally unaware?
I can only, and Councilmember Parks or Robin, you may have a response on this. Okay. I have a very basic understanding. So if someone is granted an abatement on their property, it means they don't have to pay property taxes, 10 to 15 years. And once that 10 to 15 years is over, then the property tax kicks in and is levied against that piece of property. So that would go for a townhouse or a single family house. For example, in Over the Rhine, when predominantly upscale housing was built, the tax abatement formula was applied. So folks who purchased upper middle to higher end condos, for example, paid no property taxes for actually for 15 years. So when you now the city does, Councilmember Parks, the city does has worked out an agreement with Cincinnati Public Schools so they don't fully go bankrupt over the tax abatement policy. However, it's put the schools, since the schools mainly rely on property taxes in a bind. So that years ago had to be negotiated. And I don't know where it stands today, Councilmember Parks. You may have more information. That's just a basic understanding.
From what I know from the county is it normally balances out with a community agreement, a community benefits agreement. That's what it's called. What we at the city did was is we adjusted the tax abatement. It's not perfect, but we did better than what it was, and it's not always 15%. It is negotiable. And what we came up with and what we're going to stick to is if you can develop this property without the abatement, then you should. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The abatement is to help those that really need it. And so that's a big difference.
I'd like to chime in, please, just quickly. What we found out in our research, and I'm with the People's Platform for Equality and Justice, is that disproportionately, communities like Hyde Park, Oakley, groups like 3CDC have received these tax abatements as if they were candy in a candy store. Howsoever, when people approach the county and the city to try to get some sort of tax relief, often they're required to jump through several hoops that require them to make improvements to their properties, which we know that is financially incapable for a lot of property owners, and required to pay fees in order to even apply. So, I would like to humbly ask that the Affordable Housing Group and the Women's City Club, please do your due diligence to look at the groups that have received tax abatements. The last thing that I would like to say is that even though the tax abatements are given to say the initiating contractor for 15 years, if they sell that property to a new owner, the owner then gets a reset button on the tax abatement for another 10 to 15, however many years that property qualifies for. So, I would challenge the Women's City Club and the Affordable Housing Group to please do your due diligence and look at the tax abatement issue, because it definitely is something that is separating the Black community from the white community, the rich, and from the economically challenged. And I yield with that.
Okay, and Vanessa, now that I understand the question, I can speak to that quickly. Aside from my work in Women's City Club, I have been for 47 consecutive years a trustee of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Council. And I want to tell you with every fiber of my being that the people in Hyde Park hate the tax abatements. We don't like what this does to our community either, that developers come in and buy homes that are in a slightly more affordable range so we can have a little more diversity and tear them down and put up $1 million properties. I also want to salute City Council, I know that they have worked hard to put in a 3-tiered program to try to address this. But even more, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because what Robin said is exactly true. There's no linkage between these two. The amendment, the Affordable Housing Amendment that is on our ballot, is strictly about affordable housing as it is outlined in the slides that she presented in the amendment language itself. This ongoing discussion, challenge with developers, whatever you want to call it, that is not affected by this fund. No developer who's building $1 million property in Hyde Park will get money from the Affordable Housing Amendment. I do understand that piece, but I just didn't really understand the question. So I'm glad that you brought it up, and that's something to think about. And point of fact, Women's City Club took part with Invest in Neighborhoods and several other groups, and we did a 3-part session on the tax abatement, and many of the city council members have worked very hard to try to solve this. But again, enough about that. Let's stick with the topic tonight, which is the Affordable Housing Amendment, which has a very specific purpose and will accomplish some very specific goals. So, but to be fair to Robin, she's also very helpfully posted some more information in chat
No,
for those who
I
want to
just
follow
shared
up on it.
information
So do we
about the
have
law.
another question?
Yeah. The other question was about the decision to move
Okay.
from
Okay.
city
So
AMI to county.
Oh, right.
oh, and that's the one that Peg said she would take. Yes. Thank you for bringing us
Right.
back on that topic, Vanessa. I appreciate that. Okay.
We decided we were encouraged because the AMI in the county comes closer to the HUD figures, housing urban development figures. We did not use the metropolitan area because it increases the income levels. And so if you're looking at an individual or family in Cincinnati and you compare their annual income to someone in the metropolitan area that doesn't even live in the county, there's quite a significant difference. So we went with the HUD goals.
Yeah. And I think administratively, just to add to that too, administratively, the shift was also for ease of administering the funds, because most of the housing agencies that create and manage affordable housing in Cincinnati are operating off of the like county AMI as opposed to the city AMI. And so had we used city AMI that differed from the current system, then they all have to create new infrastructure and systems in order to vet people to see who qualifies, as opposed to residents, and which adds more administrative burden on everyday people trying to find housing, right? And so part of it was that process Peg shared, where we brought together, 50, 60 different people, including housing experts, to give input on the amendment, in which it became clear, like, okay, if we stick to city AMI, we're going to create some administrative headaches that's not going to be helpful to the people trying to find housing, nor will it be helpful to the people trying to actually create and manage the housing for folks. And so it was really just to make sure we're not creating more burden.
That's very helpful. Do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing a lot of things in chat. I'm surprised. If you don't like to do chat and you want to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally, I will invite you to do so now. Anybody? Alice has a question. Alice Schneider put one in. There's a 2-part vote. We vote for the charter amendment this year. Next year we vote again, she's asking, or does council have to vote the tax increase? So I'm not sure. I didn't read that well. Alice is saying there is a 2-part vote, as she understands it, that we vote for the charter amendment now, and she's asking if next year we have to vote again, or if council needs to vote to approve the tax increase. So
yeah, that's a great question. So we will have to vote again. So the Ohio Revised Code requires that only an elected body can levy a tax ordinance. So a school board can, for property taxes, for instance, as they do, or our city council, right, can levy a tax, earned income tax, especially in the city of Cincinnati being it's connected to the charter anyway. And so the city council will have to pass an ordinance levying the tax. And so because City Council did not pass that ordinance this year to do so, what our amendment does is require them to, because the public has said, we want you to levy this tax to be used for these purposes. And so then anytime a tax is levied via ordinance passed by City Council, the voters have to vote on it. So City Council wouldn't be able to they vote to levy the tax, but they can't vote to implement the tax. Only the citizens can do that. So we'd have to come together again in 2024 to actually say, yes, we want to implement the tax that we told you to levy in November of 2023. It's a complete headache, but it's essentially a safeguard to say that every day, like it makes it a little bit harder, but it's the Ohio Revised Code. It's not a local policy, it's a state policy. The Ohio Revised Code will need to be changed through a statute, through the legislature, in order for that to shift. And so it's the process we have. And so our amendment does that. It starts that first part, and then next year we vote to implement.
Robin, is there any thought, again, this may be premature, that would come up, that the second vote for the citizens, would that come up on a special election in May if there is going to be one for something else, or would you wait until November of 2024?
So that is left to the discretion of the City Council to say if they want to do a special election. I mean, special elections cost money, and so I would be surprised if they did a special election, but they can. Our ordinance our charter amendment rather just requires that in the calendar year of 2024, the election has to take place. There is a short time window in which they have to pass the ordinance soon after the passing of the amendment, but they can say we're going to wait until November 2024 when there's already a major election to have this be on the ballot. So there's discretion there. Okay.
Peg, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think it gives, I think it gives City Council a chance to jump in again. And as Councilmember Park said, help this move forward. So to me, the second vote is also important. Yeah.
It is important. It gives us a sense of a little more citizen input and control, which is something I think we all appreciate. Okay, David Siders had his hand up. David, do you have a question you wish to ask us?
I actually just want to give a big shout out and thank you. We all know we have issues with misunderstandings, opposing viewpoints, and very confusing information. So I wanted to just add thank you to Robin for her leadership in bringing so much clarity to this, so much compassion and so much just humanity to it. Likewise, Councilperson Parks, thank you so much for your steadfast work on this issue, and Peg Fox too for bringing additional clarity. Again, one of the biggest problems I think is just confusion and misunderstanding, and I feel so optimistic because of your approach this time and our streamlined efforts. So thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David, for sharing that. You know, this is a huge issue that's taken, I can't imagine how many hours of work. We have a new question from Sarah Gideons, who's on our program committee and is our communications chair for Women's City Club. Sarah is asking if Cincinnati Development Fund is challenged by developing housing for people with limited incomes, how does the new group feel that they can spend up to $50 million a year developing housing for people with limited incomes?
Did you want to? I can answer that.
Thank you, Robin.
I'll answer. I'll answer.
So,
yeah,
I'm happy to take a shot at it.
Go ahead, Peg.
Okay.
I'll follow.
Okay. So one thing to keep in mind that if whatever between 30 and 50 million is generated by the earnings tax and is not spent, it rolls over to the following year. So that's something to always keep in mind. So the money could totally be spent or somewhat spent. I think, if one looks at the need and targets the money to the need, the developers will come. So, and will bid, and whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. I think if there's wiggle room for a variety of reasons, not just city council, if there's a wiggle room where that doesn't have to be done, then people will not do it. So it has never, I've spoken with some folks, smart people on Cincinnati Development Fund Board, and they are focused on above 80% in terms of affordability. Can't stress enough that the need is really between 30 and 50%. And that our ceiling, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund ceiling is 80%. And the 80%, the reason that's there is for single family homeowners, mortgages, taxes, someone gets behind in a payment, renovations on existing housing or building new housing, single family housing, but predominantly it's focused on the 65% and below. So those are not just benchmarks, but those will be written into the ordinance. Currently, as Councilmember Parks mentioned earlier, it's above 80% where the funding is going for affordability. And that is, there's some need there, but there's much, much more need below that. And so that's my response. Robin, you may want to take a deeper dive.
I'll add a little bit there. That was great, Peg. Thank you for that. I would also add, Over the Rhine Community House is one of our endorsing organizations. And we've had several conversations with other nonprofit developers who do affordable housing. And one of the things that we've heard again and again is that on average, it takes between 5 and 7 years to get a project off the ground that is subsidizing units at these levels that we're allocating most of the money toward. And it takes that long because it takes them that long to piece together the money. It's not about whether or not they can get the units built in terms of a willingness for folks who are trying to fund housing at this level or create housing at this level. There's such a hodgepodge maneuver needed in order to get the funding together to actually be able to create a mixed income community where a significant portion of the units are affordable at the levels that are needed that we're talking about. And so part of what this money does is actually allows those entities that are already trying to fund housing at this level, it increases their capacity to do so. And so I think we know that there's already some folks in this community who are trying to do this who don't have the resources, and this will help fill that resource gap and help them get units off the ground quicker and easier. The other thing I will say is, in my conversations with folks at CDF, part of what I am aware of from those conversations too is that part of the focus on the higher incomes is because, as I was saying earlier, it's really hard to fund units at these lower levels. You actually can create more overall units at the higher income benchmarks than if you lower the income benchmarks. And so the incentives are not there because the money is not there to go lower. And so the sentiment that I've gotten when talking to leaders at CDF is that if there's a pot of money that is available that they ain't got no choice but to spend at that level, right, then they're not going to do that trade-off of, well, instead of 50 units at this level, we can go create X units at that level. And then it's like, well, we're creating more affordable housing, but affordable to whom, right? And so what we're doing is saying, we're going to give this pot of money so that you don't have to make that trade-off. You can still create those higher units with the money you have from the other funds, right? They have a number of funds that they can pull from, that they're fundraising for, that they can still create those higher level units, but this will actually allow resources to be targeted and mandated to be targeted at those lower levels. And I don't know, in the history of America, when money from the government is put toward opportunities, people tend to find businesses that capitalize on the resources, right? Whatever it has been throughout history. I just have a feeling that our capitalistic society will find a way to use the money.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I want to, I'm not an expert on CDF by any means, but I want to full disclosure, the recently retired president and CEO, Jeannie Gallagher, is my baby sister. So I'm a little bit more aware than I normally would be of what that group has done. An important distinction to make is that Cincinnati Development Fund is not focused primarily or specifically on housing of any kind. They have developed major things like the Shakespeare Theater downtown, many large apartment complexes, and a lot of the commercial stuff that you see on Main Street, Vine Street, and in other communities as well. So that housing in general is not really the priority of Cincinnati Development Fund. They do some things very, very well. They maybe don't do the affordable housing piece as well as they might or could. Maybe the new leadership will go in a different direction, but I think it is important to recognize what they have accomplished and accept that that is not their primary focus or their primary mission. And we have a comment from Jen Ahrens I want to share with you. She says that this amendment's money can also be used on the preservation of affordable units. And that's important. And the need for renovation and preservation is endless. With significant funds, we can stop the deep and consistent loss of affordable units every year. And Robin, you're seconding that. I don't think you mentioned a lot of the detail about that, but could either of you speak to that part of the amendment to make sure people understand that extra benefit that's built into it?
You mean of renovation?
About the preservation, yeah, about not just creating new units, but preserving existing units, which are expensive to maintain and preserve.
Mm-hmm. What's written right into the amendment, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's just that. So it says that the money can be used to preserve. So part of that preservation, it could be the renovation of units so that they can be renovated but maintain affordability, because oftentimes the cost of the renovation incentivizes the increase in the rent. But also it's about the running out of subsidies. So oftentimes what happens too is LIHTC dollars, low income tax credit dollars, and other funds that subsidize units at these lower levels, they're usually term limited to some extent. And so the preservation is the renovation of it, but also being able to fill those gaps as dollars expire. And we're actually stated, I was looking up some research, actually LISC has a lot of research on this as well right now, but we're actually slated in the coming years, in the next few years, to have a lot of those LIHTC subsidies run out and expire. And so those units, if we don't fill those gaps to maintain their affordability at that level, they go to market rate. And part of it is just a money's game. Like, to put it in simple terms, if you need $1,000 a month, just for simplicity, for this one bedroom, in order to pay all the costs of keeping that one bedroom as a property manager or a developer, if the tenant is only paying $200 of that, you got an $800 gap you got to fill, right? And that's what the subsidies start to do. They help to fill those gaps. And if the subsidy runs out, well, what do? Right? You got to fill that gap, right? And so that's an oversimplification of the process, but just to kind of, in simple terms, give an example of what I mean when I say if a subsidy runs out, you have to fill that gap, or those units are hard to maintain at that lower level.
And also in the amendment under number 2, distribution, letter C, I, and number 1, it literally says preserve existing homes and operations of those homes. So that's where the preservation, when a developer, I know in some of the discussions, a developer said, I can't afford to develop this current property or renovate this house because there's a funding gap, as Robin just described. And he said, is it true that this fund can help with those funding gaps for developers? And I said, yes, it is. And he was totally unaware of that. Now he did affordable housing, some mixed income housing, but he was a for-profit developer. So it's important for them to know, as well as the nonprofit, wonderful nonprofit for over the Rhine community housing. So this fund is flexible, but what differentiates this amendment from its predecessor and other ways to get the job done is that it literally writes into the amendment these very specific benchmarks and goals and income levels, whereas no other group, and I salute and respect what you said, Janet, about the Cincinnati Development Fund. It wasn't created to do this. This is created to do it specifically. And it's created in great detail, and it involves the public. And I think the other higher end housing, I understand why that is needed. It's just that there's a big need on the other end that needs to be addressed very soon.
Yeah, I have a question. You talked about the developers that have come forward. I don't want you to name names at this point because I know that's also premature, but has your group had some developers approaching you, asking questions and indicating that if this passes, they are ready to start applying for the money and to start getting some projects in motion?
Yes. And it's current developers, but also organizations who serve vulnerable communities are definitely interested in this amendment because it helps their constituencies. You know, I've talked with some folks at the YWCA who they can't find transitional housing for survivors. And if there's money and resources going into creating housing that they can use for transitional housing to help people who help primarily, you know, in this case, women who are trying to start a new life without their abusers, like that's huge. That's a big need. And I say that as an example, but there's so many organizations. So there's the developers, nonprofit and for-profit, who even if they aren't endorsing our amendment, are quietly interested in it. But there's also other organizations whose constituents need housing that is affordable to help them improve their lives, who are very much interested in this ballot initiative and what's possible.
To build on what Robin is saying, working in neighborhoods is part of the Port Authority's remedy of 194 single-family homes. And Mark's involved in that process too. And so to the point that this fund, we spoke with Sister Barbara Bush before the text was finalized. And she said 80% in terms of single-family home buyers or single-family homes. And they could make that work with first-time home buyers. And it also would help those folks who are currently renting in those 194 single homes to transition into mortgage payments, or a down payment, or fix a roof, or anything of that sort that sometimes if you're living from check to check can send you into bankruptcy. So it really has been well thought out. And we have buy-in from folks that would be organizations that would be helping the first-time home buyer.
So is it safe to say you think you could spend, the organizations would be able to spend the $30 to $50 million in the first year if it's passed? That seemed like a good bet.
I think it spend or start to allocate are two different things.
Right. That's true. It is a process. Yes.
I think the process will start immediately because the need is so high. And I know that city council, I should say, I don't know anything really, but I trust that this city council and the mayor, if this passes, will make sure that it is properly administered. I do trust that. And I do just want to say, for transparency, you know, a lot of conversation has happened around the Cincinnati Development Fund. Right now, the Cincinnati Development Fund has been contracted by the city to administer that fund of funds that I referenced earlier, that this fund and these resources will fall under. And so they would be the primary entity that's currently tasked by the city to administer that. Now the city can vote, the city council can decide to pivot away from them at later times. But as of now, that is the entity. But that's why that community advisory board is so critical, because that group of everyday folks, right, would be mandated to have at least 6 meetings a year in which they are helping to decide the distribution and management of those funds. It's also why that up to 5% that can go toward administration is so important, because that allows Cincinnati Development Fund or whoever the city at a later time, if they choose to pivot, decides to help manage, or if the city says, we're going to take that back in house, because now we have this pot of money we can use to actually build the infrastructure to have it be in house, where we have staff that can administer this. We can hire the experts and make sure that it happens. It gives that flexibility, right? To make sure that the people who are tasked with it are actually equipped and resourced to actually administer the funds, to apply, do the complex application processes, to get matched dollars, to couple with these dollars, like all the things that go into building and funding affordable housing is really complex. And so we've thought of those things. And I say we, like 100 people, right? Like it's been a huge group of people who helped write this amendment. So a large group of people thought of these things.
Yeah. Also, there's a community a housing board, community housing board that functions in the city, that's separate from Cincinnati Development Fund. So there are some creative ways that would be open to City Council to reaching the benchmarks that the amendment calls for in terms of composition of the 11-member board, advisory board. So as Robin said, if things have been outlined, then all it takes is for a few huddles and agreement to make that work. And City Council is equipped to do that.
I hope so, yes.
And also they do the appointing. City Council appoints who sits on the community advisory board for these dollars.
I'd like to chip in. I'm confident that my colleagues would appreciate the faith that you have in us, because we really, we really give all that we have in order to do the best that we can.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah. Victoria, would any members of the current Housing Advisory Board be expected to transition to the new board, or would you expect it to be a whole new clean slate, start over? Is that too premature?
I don't know. Okay. If I had my choice, I would like to see
a whole new clean slate.
A whole new slate.
Well, it's a new initiative, and again, I realize that's not up to us, that's up to City Council to decide, but it's good for us to know some of the thoughts so we can, shall we say, communicate with our City Council members who are all up for election in a few weeks, and let them know our thoughts.
Yeah, I would like to support Councilmember Park's statement in as big a way as possible. And I'm sure Robin and other organizations involved in the campaign would feel the same way. Yeah.
Well, in that aspect, I only speak for myself.
I know that. But it's good to hear that, Councilmember Parks. It's good.
Yeah. And Vanessa has posted another question asking, I guess she means the current Housing Advisory Board, who is on that. She has inquired but not gotten a response. Yeah, I didn't find it. Oh, I see that Robin, who is a great little Googler here, already has put the URL for that. It's on the ChooseCincinnati.com Housing Advisory Board. I looked on the city website and I did not find it last night. So yes, if you want to know more about the current Housing Advisory Board, Robin has put the link in the chat and you can go there and find out. And I'm grateful to know that. So it's been a learning curve trying to inform myself about this and learn things. And I'm sure we all share that thought. So
Good luck.
Janet, can you see the list I
Yeah, we
just,
can see.
okay.
Oh,
That's the-
yes, there,
That's the
yes.
current board. Thank you, Robin.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
So all you need to do is click on the link that Robin
Yep.
posted.
The link is awesome. I salute Robin for her quickness on
She's
posting.
swift, didn't she?
Well, my husband is on that board, so
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm familiar with it.
Ah,
And also, what good would it be to have a millennial here if I can't Google well?
oh,
Good point. Good point.
good point. Yeah. So what other questions, folks? We have just a few more minutes before we said we'd try to let our speakers go off to do more good work for the community. What other questions might you have? This is a rare opportunity to address the two women who have made this amendment and our city council member. More questions, anybody? You can unmute yourself and ask it out loud if typing in chat is not your thing. Nobody has more questions. Okay. Well, we just want to remind everybody to early voting starts in just a few weeks. I think it's October 11th, I
Yep.
think, give or take. And to please, no matter who or what you're voting for, go vote. That's an important thing. No matter what it is, you need to go vote and make your voice heard. If you don't vote, you never get to complain for a whole year.
I
So,
will say I'm not here as a non-political person, and so I care who you vote for and what you vote for. If nothing else, vote yes on issue 24.
Yeah.
I'll say it and vote yes on issue 24. And please join our coalition, Cincinnati Action for Housing Now, in supporting Councilwoman Victoria Parks, who have been a partner with us in this affordable housing work, and vote for her as well. And so, yeah, I'll say it. You don't have to, Janet. I'll say it.
Yeah, I can at least say that Mark has endorsed issue 24. And one of our concerns is that it is the last issue on the ballot. And so it makes it tougher for people to get through all the issues, and there are 7 total. So remember 24. If you want to vote backwards, that may be a good idea. Start with issue 24 and work backwards. Anyway, vote yes, please. It's so important. It's critical.
and what I can say is what I said at the beginning, just to underscore, Women's City Club is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization, but we are allowed to endorse issues, and Women's City Club has voted to endorse this housing amendment issue, which we now know is issue 24. When we endorsed it, we didn't know what the number was. So we have endorsed that. I can say that much truthfully and fairly, without getting us into any trouble with any legal entities. So, last call for questions. Does anyone else have a question of any kind? Okay. Well, I think that's a credit to how thorough both Peg. Oh, Jan, you would like to say yes? Please do.
Well, I would, by being transparent, I have to say I have represented the Women's City Club on the campaign committee, so I'm not exactly non-biased either. But what I would like to say to people is, and maybe Robin would like to speak to this, or Peg, it has been amazing to work on this campaign and see the level of community support and the people. We had to get, I mean, this is not easy to get a ballot initiative done. And we had to get 6,000 some hundred signatures, verified signatures. And so in order to do that, we got 12,000 signatures to make sure that we had them all, verified. And I think the level of support from the community really is speaking to the people at the city, that the people of Cincinnati want this affordable housing. And I just wanted to say that and congratulate Robin on leading such a campaign. This is not easy to do, and I think we've been really successful And I, like them, do hope that we are able to get this done.
Yeah. So, and Mary put a great thing in the chat about if folks want to get involved with helping us to pass issue 24. First, we just want to say thank you to Jancy Moore. She has been amazing on the campaign team. And she knows everyone in the city, as you all know, so it's like super helpful to have someone, a connector. And so thank you for your leadership. In terms of if folks want to get involved more, the website link that I listed earlier, I'll repost in the chat. Jen, who's also on our campaign team from Peasley Neighborhood Center, posted it in the chat. If you can go to that link, you can find ways to get involved with the work we have coming up to pass this amendment. And to speak to the community's desire for this, we've been knocking doors. We have some canvassers going out 5 days a week, and then we do volunteer canvassing every Saturday. And 74% of everyone whose doors we've knocked, like of the people we've talked to, have been willing to pledge to vote yes for this. I don't know about you, but getting 74% of anybody to agree on something is rare. And this is across all racial demographics, income demographics. And so it's clear that we are really doing the work that the people want. And so I'm grateful to be a part of it. And thank you all for your time tonight.
I'd also like to suggest in a probably smaller way that Women's City Club could write an op-ed piece and have that posted in the Enquirer and maybe Cincinnati Herald, City Beat. But I mean, I think that would be helpful. Early voting, as Janet says, does start on October the 11th. So, you know, you've endorsed, so it would be nice to see an op-ed. Yeah.
And we have discussed that. We just haven't identified who's going to do it yet, but that has come up in conversations
That's great.
At the board meetings and other meetings. Maybe we'll get a willing volunteer for that. Sarah's smiling. She likes to write things like that. So we'll see. Sarah's been overworked, though. If there are no more questions to be asked, I want to most sincerely thank Peg Fox and Robin Wright Pierce for joining us, and for Victoria Parks to joining in and speaking up on behalf of City Council. We thank you for your participation tonight. We thank you even more for your ongoing commitment to making our city a more just and equitable place to live, which is, again, the mission of Women's City Club, that we want to work for a just and fair society for all citizens. We encourage you to go to the Women's City Club website, and we are Woman, WOMANS, City Club. But if you type in almost anything, it'll come up. WomenCityClub.org. We have an abundance of amazing things going on. As Jeff mentioned, we are co-sponsoring no fewer than 5 programs in the next several weeks relative to the election, and those are listed in our bulletin that you can read on our website, thanks to Sarah's good work. Some in-person city council and in-person school board options, also virtual ones, and then an issues forum coming up later in October. You can also read about our very wonderful and amazing Feist Tea event that we hold every December. And I didn't look up, I know Laurie's on here. Is it December 3rd, Laurie? It's a Sunday, the first Sunday.
It's December 3rd, the first Sunday in December.
Good. Okay, I thought I had that date right. December 3rd, the first Sunday. It is open to the public. It's a wonderful event at which we recognize our feisty women. I was thrilled and delighted to be chosen to be a feisty woman last year. It's really fun to be the honoree, but it's even more fun to be able to sit there and eat all the good food and clap for everybody. So do come and do those things. And then we are having a National Speaker Forum coming up in March. I'm going to wait a little bit before we announce the speaker because some things are still in process, but our topic is going to be truth in journalism, and we hope to have a truly wonderful speaker, and more to follow on that. That'll be sometime in March, probably March 19th. But do go to our website and check us out. We are not having a Women's City Club sponsored program per se in October because we are co-sponsoring those other 5 programs. But look for us in November when we believe our program will be on school issues. We have an education action group, and we are very concerned about some of the issues that are taking place at the state level, about the State Board of Education, curriculum, and more. And we also may loop in some of the local issues. That is still in progress, but look on our website for all those good things. So, and thank Jeff for all his good work on this. And without any further ado, I will say thank you and good night to everybody. You remember, you can copy the chat if you click on those 3 little buttons on my screen. They show up at the bottom of the chat. I know everybody's device is different, but you may save the chat and have this abundance of information that Robin has shared with us. And we will have a follow-up report on this program in our next bulletin, and hopefully we can capture some of that there. So thank you, everybody. Let's clap for our speakers and thank them
you.
for their
Thank you.
wonderful
It's a pleasure.
presentation.